Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Event Industry News Podcast. My name is James Dickson, and as always, I wish you a very good morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever or wherever you join our podcast from today. And welcome aboard. And after the last few weeks of going transatlantic and speaking to people in exotic Californian locations with golf course and swimming pool backgrounds, I'm delighted to say that I'm joined today by somebody who has a very similar background in terms of their physical presence at the moment to me. We welcome to the podcast for the first time Sophie Bannister. Sophie is the head of creative development at M&C Saatchi Talks and is on the podcast today to talk about creativity, about content, and all sorts of fabulous things that they've been working on within their group over the last few weeks and months. Sophie, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, James. Thanks for having me.
You're very, very welcome. As I said, a lovely sort of home background there, and not to sound disparaging in any way, but I've suffered the indignity of coming on the podcast in the last couple of weeks and been joined by people with these exotic, beautiful backgrounds behind them.
Mine's not quite as glamorous today.
32 degrees. No, we're back to normality today, as I call it. I've got the dog asleep behind me on the sofa and all sorts of normal stuff that we've got used to in the last 12 months. As I said, Sophie, you are the head of creative development at M&C Saatchi Talks. Tell us a little bit, first of all, before we really get into the conversation today, about the organization, about what the company does, about your role in there, for anybody who's not familiar with the company as a brand.
Absolutely. So M&C Saatchi Talk is part of the M&C Saatchi group, and we are the kind of creative communications specialists within the group itself. So predominantly focusing on both media and social earned first ideas. My remit within that is to oversee the social, experiential and content outputs from the agency. But again, always with that earned first approach. So we're really looking, and our kind of specialism is in the art of conversation. How can we really refine and create shareable conversations that people actually want to be having in the real world, be that for a piece of media coverage or be that in an event setting itself?
And it's interesting because experiential events, by their very definition, want to, they're very hands-on, they're very tactile. Brands want to get a product into the hands of potential customers or a new experience, in a physical setting. The last 12 months, I guess, must have been particularly difficult in trying to maintain that creativity when you are delivering experiential events on behalf of your clients. Tell us about some of those challenges.
Yeah, I mean, I think for any events industry people over the past year, it's been challenging, but also I probably weirdly felt quite excited, might be the wrong word, when we went into lockdown, but knew that we were going to be going through a period of huge transformation. And I think the events industry itself has been really impacted by that and forced to think really differently about what it means to actually have an experience, what it means for somebody to actually experience a brand, take away a message, how those experiences happen. So i.e. not physical. And I think we were in a really fortunate position that lots of our brands that we work with are really forward thinking and really embrace that challenge with us, and were challenging us to actually rethink the way we were doing that. The kind of events that we typically do span from being kind of press events, so what would maybe traditionally be your breakfast, your lunches, your kind of more private media settings, through to direct to consumer. So I think in the month before lockdown, we'd had two quite large events. One for a beauty brand we were working with, where it was a kind of pop-up shop, for the want of a better words, with panel talks happening in it, which was ticketed for consumers in the evening, but we really used it as kind of a content hub in the daytime for their retailers and for media. And then we'd also done a 2-day party in a warehouse for 400 people each night, which felt mad that we managed to get that away like 3 weeks before lockdown. So we were doing kind of quite a broad range of events that were different scale to different audiences. So it's been really interesting over the past year to change how we do that. So we've done kind of your media days via Zoom or other platforms. We've done content creation days. We've done a lot of kind of live streaming as well, and live streaming kind of directly through social platforms, one-on-one, through to really big events where we're reaching kind of in the tens of thousands of people. during one moment. So if anything, I think the innovation that we've seen over the past 12 months has actually shown us how much more accessible we can make events, how much of a broader audience we can reach. And probably what excites me the most in the role that I've been working in is how we can actually bring together events, social content, and really make it an ecosystem that works well together and empowers each other, rather than an event being what it has been, I think, for a number of years, sometimes one moment in time that doesn't work that hard and can be quite a big investment.
Yeah, and it's interesting that point that you make there, because you will be dealing with social media content creation and creation of fabulous social media campaigns. And I guess the target of those is for people to interact on those platforms. And the target with live events is for people to interact with those events. And in the past, have there been occasions where actually you don't want those two elements to meet because you want the interaction, the responses in those vertical markets, whereas now you're looking at ways to join them all together and get that social media into interaction whilst they may be on a digital event?
Yeah, definitely. And I think we spent quite a lot of time getting really granular and making sure we've got the right people at the table to understand what is that consumer journey, how are we where are we starting different conversations? Is it easy for people to get involved? Are we kind of sharing one message on one platform, doing something different on another? It's really kind of forced brands, well, I think the ones that are kind of doing well, to really bring their teams together and stop thinking so kind of in their individual verticals. Actually think about how can you make this one moment in time, be it an event or experience or something else, be something that's way more accessible and just bigger than it was before.
Sure, because I guess if you've got someone at a physical live event, you're doing your absolute best with the content of that event to capture the attention of that audience member. And you perhaps in the past didn't want them distracted by being on Twitter or Facebook or Snapchat. Whereas now, I suppose if you can guide them to use those platforms at the same time as being at a live event, they've captured that moment on their timeline, haven't they? When they scroll back in 2 or 3 years' time, or if their time hop appears on Facebook, they can see where they were and what they were doing. The memory of that event will come back to them.
Yeah. I mean, in some senses, I mean, it's rare, I think, that brands now are wanting to do events that they don't want people to be sharing. If they've got somebody into their space, they want them to share them with their friends because they're likely to be like-minded people who they're also trying to target. So I think that kind of natural shift to don't do embargoed events, like make sure everything's accessible, had been happening anyway. I think where we now are really conscious and kind of investing a lot of energy is actually about the content a brand creates from that event and making sure we're packaging that event up as something that can work hard afterwards. So less about, yes, the people sharing at events is still really important, but if you've got talent coming down, if you've built an amazing set, how can you actually use that as a studio for your downtime or before you de-rig to actually capture that experience or a version of it that can then be broadcast out through your social channels, your platform, offered to a retailer. We did a press day last year for a fragrance brand we were working with, where the aim of the day was to do one-to-one media meets across Europe. So obviously that setting worked quite well, whereas in the past we would have had a very costly but beautiful weekend, probably flying all the media in to meet the talent, a series of one-to-one interviews, and then maybe a beautiful dinner. We actually just, in brutal terms, managed to bash quite a few interviews in the day. But then because we had them there and we had them in a studio in London, we were then able to offer a live stream to one of their key retailers in Europe to actually access their audience. So all of a sudden, brands had something of real value that retailers were crying out for, which was content last year. So being able to kind of really think differently and not just have event producers think about the event, but actually have people in the sales team involved in that, telling us what their retailers need, to have people in the social team telling us what they were trying to get on social media. It's kind of just joined up all that world and made everything work much harder. So I think previously you might not have had those two teams talking to each other about an event that was happening in London.
Yes, it's interesting, isn't it? There is a I suppose, a brutal efficiency of doing things in that way. I mean, how many people have you spoken to in the last 12 months who said, my working day is suddenly so much more efficient because I can do 2 or 3 video meetings in the morning and then do a load of stuff in the afternoon. Whereas if they were physical meetings, they might be bouncing from 2 or 3 different locations in London or Manchester or somewhere, to actually go to those, and in terms of the media days, I suppose there's less fluff around it. There's less offering tea, coffee, and refreshments. You can get that media person straight into the interview, give them their allocated time, move them on, and get the next person in. That there is a level of efficiency that comes with how we've learned to do things in the last 12 months.
Definitely, and I think that's the efficiency in terms of how events are run, the people that you can get in, the amount of people that you can reach is great. But I also think that especially those first 3-4 months when pivot was the word, wasn't it? But when we were having to pivot a lot of plans, I think it's really agencies' responsibility to be able to understand the full challenges that our brands and clients were facing at the time, but also being able to access different people to talk to be able to connect the dots. Like, we were speaking to some retailers who we work with and are friendly with, who were telling us, we need brands to give us content. We've got nothing at the moment. We can't get into studios. We can't do shoots. What can you get us? Really then allowed us to be like, well, actually, we've got this moment coming up. Let's make that work hard, create lots of assets that we can sweat across every platform, not just yours, but also your retailers. Just really being able to use experiences and events to power more, I think, is what's been really interesting. And as we look forward to what's in future post-pandemic, if there ever is post-pandemic, that is a shift that I think we'll see smart brands make. Really think about what moments in time they are creating experiences, and then how they actually live across all their different channels, as well as being able to buy them more opportunities with retailers and the like.
And it's interesting that, like you said, the value of content has grown significantly. I think, up until the pandemic, people knew that content was great, but there were loads of opportunities to create it. As soon as you take those opportunities away to create that content, and you suddenly look at what pool of resources and assets you've got historically, I think that's when the penny drops. People, have we missed out on opportunities to capture content at previous events? And you're so right in what you were saying there, utilizing, live event spaces as studios. If you've got cameras set up, if you've got stage sets built and ready to go, why not film some of the rehearsal? Why not film a backstage video? If you capture as much as possible, because you never know, I suppose, when you're going to be able or need to have to delve into that content now.
Yeah, and not just the behind the scenes stuff either, like really thinking about what's the story, what's the moment that we're creating with this experience, how do we then tell that on different platforms and make sure this isn't a one day, one moment thing. It can power so much more. And I think that's a reason why we've always had content and experiential sit hand in hand together at M&C Saatchi Talk. And I think this year's just really allowed it to kind of come into its own to a degree. And all of a sudden, kind of everyone gets it a bit more, rather than it always being, I remember going to lots of meetings before, people being like, oh, that's a lot. that's a lot of different things that you've got. But really, it's all an experience, creates content, fuels content. It needs content to promote it, that it all kind of works together, and it can work hard if you plan for that.
It's apt that we're talking about, the opportunities to create content, because to put things in perspective, I'm not sure when people are going to be listening or watching today's podcast, but we're recording this on the 15th of July. And, in 4 days' time, we reached that sort of final deadline for the lifting of restrictions in the UK, certainly. And live events are coming back. They will be back from next week. There are plenty of events that are earmarked to take place as soon as those restrictions are lifted next week. And we are at a stage now within the industry where everybody is deep into the planning stages and execution of proper live events again. So all this stuff that we've been talking about over the last sort of 6 or 7 months, Sophie, about how we pivoted or pirouetted, depending on how soft you want to make that term, we are now pirouetting back to what we all did before, but with the added benefit of having the last 12 months experience under our belts. To tell us about some of the maybe not necessarily specific events, but when it comes to planning forthcoming live events with some of your clients, what experiences and elements are you able to take out of the last 12 months into forthcoming live events? And what are some of the key messages that you think events will need to consider as they go back into that live arena?
Yeah, well, you are catching me just off of the back of what I would say is not our first, because we've done a few live events over the past few months, but our first kind of large scale live event. We were at Goodwood Festival Speed on behalf of a brand we work with. And actually, I mean, it was great. The energy that was there, the amount, like, you just felt it in the air, like the buzz of people being out and about again.
Sun was shining as well.
Well, not always.
Well,
not always. I don't think the team doing loading will remember the sun shining when it was torrential rain. But it just that though, like I mean, on a personal note, like for me, being back at an event and in that event bubble, meeting people, talking to people that you have not met before, but they end up becoming your event family when you're kind of locked into these small bubbles over a week and a half. That is why a lot of us are in this. We love people. We love seeing the real thing. And as great as the digital events have been and such a massive achievement, well, after being starved of it for so long, nothing's quite like that real kind of hands-on moment. But from a attendee perspective, it was wonderful to see the kind of energy that people had. We had kind of a more private space, so we weren't in the main kind of thick of it. But we hosted a couple of private media events as well. And on one of the nights, they just didn't want to leave. You could see like how much everybody was enjoying being sat at a dinner with people and engrossed in conversation. And I think that is electric and something that we will all really relish. However, the flip side of that is it's a difficult thing to navigate. And I think from those kind of key messages and what we need to be doing, we need to obviously be making people feel safe. We need to make sure that all the protocols that are kind of inherent to us now are there. But it's not going to be easy. I don't think the next week is going to be the Freedom Day that it was kind of being pitched as a few weeks ago. I think it's become very clear to see quite quickly that obviously numbers are escalating again, which means that a lot of people are being pinged on track and trace. We had quite a few attendees who had to drop out on the day themselves because they'd either been contacted by track and trace or they had tested positive. We also had staff that were being pinged by track and trace before they even got down to site who had to isolate, which then meant that we were having to pivot and find different people to come down. And again, I think anyone in events at the moment knows how difficult it is to find people. July has been a very busy month. We've obviously seen a lot of people not work for the best part of a year and then either move into different things or take up full-time roles. The freelance pot isn't like it was. So a lot of these challenges are actually just logistical nightmares, and where you might have oversubscribed an event before, you just can't do that anymore because you've obviously got to plan for COVID restrictions. But equally, you might have dropouts in a very different way to what you had. So I think there's definitely from me, like, yes, the in real life moment is so good. It feels so good to be back out there after the past 15 months. But there is a level of caution with that and just challenges that we won't foresee again. And I think, everyone's going to face that, particularly with track and trace. It's proving to be, I think, over the next month or so, going to be rife.
It's interesting that you mentioned the current situation in as much of the fact that cases are going up. We're at a fortunate stage, aren't we, in this country in terms of vaccination numbers? You know, the numbers are fantastic in terms of how many people have been vaccinated. And we know medically now that has a direct link to, you know, helping reduce transmission, to helping reduce hospitalizations and all of that stuff that we know. But there is still that level of contingency that you have to plan in from a staffing point of view, which you've rightly mentioned. And also as well, when you mentioned about this whole vision that we had, I think a few months ago, of reaching that final day and people sort of opening their front doors and blinking at sunshine for the first time and running out into the streets for big parties. In a way, what's happening at the moment is retaining that level of caution amongst everybody to just step that little bit more carefully, to plan effectively and not just throw caution to the wind, which I think a few months ago it felt like that was what was going to happen, like we were going to get to that date and throw caution to the wind.
Definitely. And I think where that provides some brand challenges, I mean, like, it was quite easy for me to say, we need to follow all the normal things, like the safety measures that we know are in place. Well, actually, they all go out the window in a couple of months' time. So then all of a sudden, as a brand hosting an event, you could be worrying people because you're not putting certain things in place because you don't have to anymore. But you could also be putting people off because you are asking them maybe to be stricter than government guidelines are facing. So I think whilst we're still in, I don't know what a post-pandemic world will look like or when that will be. I don't think it's going to be this year anytime soon. I think we're gonna face a lot of changing, and it's really difficult to predict human behavior. I think technically, like proper post-pandemic, humans adapt very quickly. A lot of it will be similar to what we saw before. I'm hoping though that we don't lose the tech that we've had, and I'm really excited about things like I keep banging on about it internally, but things like Black Friday this year, I'm so interested to see how many brands will embrace live shopping as a function. We know that's massive. It drives so many sales that I think the smart brands will be jumping on that this year, because we've seen, obviously, sorry, I'm going on a tangent.
No, this is great.
We're seeing retailers are closing down stores. I think only yesterday we had John Lewis announce that they're making about 1,000 staff redundant.
Right, another 1,000 job cuts.
But that's because those online sales aren't slowing down, even though retail is open. So how can we actually make sure that we're embracing tech and actually adopting some of the things we see happening overseas to actually enhance the experience that we offer on things like Black Friday here? I think that's how smart brands will be behaving. But in that interim, we're going to have a lot of kind of, I think, stop-start for events, and just knowing how to manage it and make people feel comfortable, I think, will be really unique to the sector you're in, to the type of event you're doing, the type of audience you're targeting. I don't think there will be a one-size-fits-all approach to how brands should be rolling out events, especially when we move through that ambiguous, what are the regulations kind of space.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned about Black Friday, because it's a really interesting topic from an event and an experiential and a brand perspective, especially when you look at all the technology and platforms that we've become familiar with in the last year when it comes to video conferencing, live streaming. You and I were talking a little bit off air today before we recorded this about the StreamYard platform that we now use for this podcast and what it can do, and then more sophisticated platforms that are available now. And I mean, in reality now, a brand could easily create their own shopping channel on YouTube on Black Friday. They could just broadcast all day with offers, with a professional presenter, with a proper studio, and they could put links up as the broadcast is happening, put stuff into the live chat. There's so much stuff that people could get creative with on that in that particular instance.
Definitely. And I'm not even going to try and do the details because I'm going to get them all completely wrong, but I know for Singles Day last year, there was one of the big influencers in Asia hosted a live stream, and the amount of revenue that was driven in a 1 hour live stream by this influencer was like, it made my jaw drop. It was, I'm not going to try and guess a number because I'll get it completely wrong, but it was in the millions. It wasn't in the like tens of thousands. It was massive in 1 hour from an influencer by live streaming. And we've seen, particularly in luxury, you've seen that shift. You have a lot of the luxury brands now. I think it's Gucci. You've got a really amazing service where you can have a personal shopping experience at any time, anywhere in the world from a Gucci store now. And I'm sure lots of the others do as well. You even saw it. I mean, I'm a bit of a fan of going to Bicester Village, and like, you could just WhatsApp everyone and jump on a call to them, and when the stores were closed, and get pictures sent through straight away. And that live shopping experience when you're not there has started, whether people have kind of clocked that or not. And I think this year will still be maybe a bit of newness to it, but I think in 2-3 years time it will be the norm, it will be expected. You think back to those kind of crazy images we were used to seeing of Black Friday, of people kind of pounding down the doors.
Yeah.
No one's going to want to do that anymore. But we're all so used to actually getting a lot from moments like this, where we're sat in our homes talking to someone.
Exactly, yeah.
We could totally be using those. And I think, again, I'm excited and trying to get a few clients to really jump into it this year. But how can they use the talent who are creating lots of content for them that's influencing their audience into a live moment to create an experience that can drive sales? Like, that to me is like the things that I'm really excited about, where we start blending that kind of in real life moments or big calendar moments with the kind of tech and just shifting consumer behavior that we've seen over the past year or so.
And it's the whole subject of influencers, I think, that's a whole other podcast there that you probably got a lot of opinions on, given the role that you've got and what M&C Saatchi Talks do. But when you look at it in a basic numbers point of view, when you used to be looking for opportunities for a client to either advertise or gain exposure, you look at the key figures. How many viewers does a television program broadcast at 7 p.m. on a Saturday night get? And then the cost of advertising in those breaks, is dictated by the audience figures. If you actually look at live audience figures now for TV, they're dwarfed by what one individual may have as a Twitter following.
Yeah.
Or an Instagram following now.
Yeah.
And I know that influencers are forming a bigger part of brand advertising budgets and where they target and put their money. But, even somebody with 150, 200,000 followers in the right setting for the right brand could be absolutely key. And I guess that's something that you will have had experience of working with some of the clients that you work with.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, another string to my bow is a lot of the influencer work that we do, because they are the ones that they're content creators. They're producing a lot of this content. You can use them in events. A lot of the events we do are, especially the kind of direct to consumer events, rely heavily on influencers, be that promoting them, be that being the face of them, or being part of a panel talk of them. Again, it's the more you can bring all this together, the stronger it actually is. And I mean, it's interesting what you're saying about the figures there, because again, it totally depends on what the brand's trying to do. But you don't need to be working with influencers with the millions of followers to be creating either great content or reaching the right audiences. A lot of the time we're working and recommending influencers who've got 5,000 followers, 10, 20. Actually, they've got such heavily engaged audiences. They can be driving huge traffic through to whatever that moment is, whether it is promoting an event or directly to a website. I think, influencers are great. And I think that's where actually, if you think about what that kind of industry has grown on, influencing purchasing decisions, bringing them into experiences that are driving shopping is just a really smart way to make your budgets work harder again.
Absolutely. If you don't mind, I wouldn't mind just going back ever so slightly to something that you touched on when you were talking about working at Goodwood Festival of Speed last week, and that approach going forward into how you, I suppose, pitch the level of safety that you implement into a live event post restriction, if that makes sense. Because from a brand point of view, how that brand is perceived ultimately, I suppose, is the key objective. The brands that you will work with are no doubt global, huge, consumer brands. And I guess even if there are no restrictions applicable, they have to really strike that fine balance of making sure that they're making their own clients feel safe at their event, irrespective of what the restrictions may be. You're nodding, so I'm hoping that I make sense to you in that respect, because we're having it at the moment with events that we're working on. They're coming up in a few months' time. Technically, at the moment, they won't be subject to social distancing restrictions, but we're still going to do that because we feel that it will make our audience feel safer and more inclined to come. Is that something that you're very much working with your own clients and what they're wanting to do?
Definitely. And I think it's such a case by case basis, dependent on what type of event you're doing. I think with Goodwood, we were in quite a fortunate situation that it was a government test event. which is why it could go ahead kind of pre the restrictions lifting at such a big scale. So it meant those COVID restrictions weren't the brand enforcing them, they were the event organisers. So that was daily testing before you came on site. You had to kind of prove that, bring ID. The majority of the event is outdoors anyway, so no mask wearing, but then mask wearing when you went into any inside spaces until you were sat and eating. I think when it comes to brands owned events, it's going to be a tricky one to navigate, and it comes back to who you're targeting, the format of the event,
sure,
and kind of what setting it's taking place in. So we are looking at an event at the moment which may be kind of more of a drop in, drop out setting. Again, for that, I mean, we're not at the stage where we've made final decisions yet, but we will probably limit the number of people who are invited in the day so that we know we're not oversubscribing. We'll probably try and book people in. So whereas we would have had a totally fluid drop in, drop out, we'll probably try and book people into time windows so that we can kind of police the amount of people coming in. And then we will probably still have masks available, not maybe enforce it, but probably from a staffing perspective, whenever you're inside, enforce it. Because I think it's as much about making sure that the attendees feel comfortable, but also not putting any staff at risk as well during it.
Sure, yeah.
And
I think there's that whole old term that's just pinged into my head, social and corporate responsibility, you know, and, you know, you are a business with your own staff, and you are in turn representing significant brands who also want to be perceived to be doing the right thing in events that you're running on their behalf. It goes back to our original question. So there's that social corporate responsibility when it comes to your own staff, isn't there?
Definitely. And like, yeah, it's how we'll be treating that and tackling that, and then how we'll be tackling guests will probably be a little bit different. It might be a bit more overcautious with that, not overcautious, wrong word to use, a bit more strict with our own staff, and probably implementing daily testing and mask wearing and social distancing where possible. And then with guests, maybe it will be a bit more aligned with the kind of the new government rules. Not that I think anyone really knows exactly what they are yet either.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And I think, I mean, like, a lot of that's still changing, isn't it? It's only just 2 days ago, I think, that they just announced that in London you will have to wear masks on all transport.
Yes,
I think a lot of it will be, again, the favourite word of the year, pivoting and really understanding what consumer behaviour looks like as we come out of the pandemic, because it's a fine line to balance, isn't it? You don't want to say be enforcing, if I go to the most visually obvious one, enforcing mask wearing, if the government are saying you don't have to, you don't want to make guests feel uncomfortable when they come down, but equally you want to run a safe site. So I think it will be, I wish I had the answer, but I think it will be kind of seeing what the next few weeks are like.
Exactly. There is no definitive answer at the moment, is there? Because you are absolutely right. You know, we're stepping into the unknown, where even though on paper or on a website or where the restrictions are, are listed, they will lift.
Yeah.
And by definition, we don't legally have to adopt those restrictions anymore that we've all been subjected to. But as I said, it then becomes an ethical question, a moral question, a question of brand perception, which will be so important to you guys. I'm looking at the time, and I want to keep going, if that's okay. I've got one last thing that I wanted to touch on today, Sophie, and that is, put aside everything we've said about, that sort of, not the responsibility, but mask wearing and things like that. Does it excite you when the right opportunity comes along? And I dare say you're probably working on stuff at the moment where you've got that opportunity that you can see on the horizon already, where it's going to be a real return to, an event that they used to look like. And I look at some of the test events, some of the festival test events, drinks activation zones in festivals is an obvious one, where you have a DJ there and it's all branded up and you've got people going in there and listening to music. Is there stuff on the horizon that actually excites you and you're looking at thinking that's going to really look like it used to look like?
Yes and no. I think coming straight off of Goodwood, like, I feel like that was our one that we were like, oh, can't believe we're actually going to be together. Like, me and the team were just so excited, and also spend time with our clients, like all that good stuff that we've missed. So I feel like very privileged that we've just had that really big, exciting moment. Yes, there are things that are coming up over the next kind of few months that we're getting excited about, but there's still that. I mean, I joke and call myself the safety police quite a lot, because I think it would be naive to just be fully excited about them. Things, as we've seen, change so quickly. And even an event itself, I think you always need to have the reality that it might not happen. It might not go ahead the way you want it to. You might not be able to be there yourself. Your guests might not be able to be there. So yeah, I wish I could be more really excited for it, but there is definitely an element of caution. But I do think I'm excited to see what consumer behaviour is like, particularly from next week and onwards, when we do kind of move into that freedom day, and see how people actually do behave and respond, because I think then that will give brands and event organisers a lot more confidence in what they can be doing going forward. I think, unfortunately, for the right now, we're back into something that feels just as ambiguous as we were 6 months to a year ago.
Absolutely. And rather than cautious, I would say pragmatic. If there's one thing that we are in the events industry, it's pragmatic. We've always had the ability, I think, to change direction quickly if needed. There are levels of contingency built into event planning. That's always been the case. So in many respects, I think a lot of people would agree that arguably we've been the industry best equipped to adapt and change and to cope with what's been thrown at us in the last year, because of the very nature of how we've always run events safely, with planning, with elements of safety built into them, by default. And that pragmatic approach, you're absolutely right to highlight that. That's one that we're all going to continue to take, regardless of what the law sort of states or what the guidance may be post the 19th of July.
Definitely. And pragmatic's a much better term than my boring cautious approach. But
well, no, cautious is right, but pragmatic and adaptable.
Yes, there we go.
Adaptable. We've been talking on the podcast today to Sophie Bannister. Sophie is the head of creative development at M&C Saatchi Talks, and there's so much that we could cover, and perhaps in future, Sophie, we could cover, on a future episode, because I'm sure there's loads of stuff that you guys are going to be working on in the coming months with clients, particular case studies, examples that you might like to talk about. It's been great chatting to you on the podcast today, and I think if you're okay with it, we'd love to have you back on again in future. And if there's anything you want to share with our audience and talk about, then please do feel free to come back on, and let's have a chat again in future, if that's okay.
Definitely, and hope, fingers crossed, I might be in a more glamorous location on a beach.
No, I want to see full production suite behind you. Back to an organizer's office somewhere with laptops set up and coats
back
hung on
my
the wall.
hard hat and high vis.
Yeah, exactly right. If you want to find out a bit more about M&C Saatchi Talks, the website address is now on the screen for anybody who's watching the video on the website. mcsaatchitalk.com is their website if you want to find out a little bit more about the guys there, what they're doing. And of course, if you are a brand that's listening to this and you want to find out how they can help you, then I would urge you to get across to the website and have a look through it. It's really well laid out and really clear to find the bits and pieces that you might want to find. Sophie, any presumably social media people can find you guys on there as well?
Yeah, same handle. So M&C Saatchi Talk.
Fantastic. That's great. And of course, if you want to get in touch with us, Event News Blog is our Twitter. Eventindustrynews.com is the website. And I always wrap up by saying that, of course, if you're listening to today's podcast, you can hop over to the website and watch video versions of all of the Event Industry News podcasts. And whilst you're there, check up with some of the latest news features and supplements that are on the website. If you are watching this already, do find us on your chosen podcast platform on your mobile device, and you can listen to audio versions of all our podcasts, going right back to the nearly 250 episodes that we've recorded over the last few years. And it brings us to the end of today's episode. We've run a little bit longer than normal, but we've had a great conversation with Sophie today, and we look forward to welcoming her back again on the podcast in future. For now, time to sign off. My name's James Dickson, and we'll see you on the next episode of the Event Industry News Podcast.